Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session on open banking and open APIs at Virtual FinTech Fair. It's been a great event so far. We have some very interesting people from financial services and FinTech domain. I would let them introduce themselves, but I will just kind of call out, who all is there on the panel. And I really appreciate everybody's time to be on the panel. It's a great set of people. So I'm looking forward to this session. So we have Sam Tanskul, who is the MD of Krungsri Finovate, and we have Saurabh, who is the VP and head of FinTech and e-commerce at TransUnion Sybil. We have Lareina Wang, who is the head of smart banking at HSBC. We have Manish Diwaan, who is the CEO of the Apex platform. So why don't we actually go, around the table and just do a quick sort of round of introductions. Just say like, 2-3 lines on, each one of you, please.
Okay. Starting with me. So hi, my name is Sam. I'm the managing director of Krungsri Finovate, which we are the corporate venture capital of Krungsri Bank, the fifth largest bank in Thailand, and we are the partner bank of the MUFG, Mitsubishi Financial Group, the leading bank in Japan. So I have another hat looking at the head of innovation for the consumer business for the Krungsri. So that is introduction from me.
Thanks. Saurabh?
I am Saurabh. I am the head of the FinTech and e-commerce businesses at TransUnion Sybil, which is one of India's most well-respected and largest credit bureaus. And I've been in the FinTech ecosystem in India for the last 8-9 years, and overall come with around 17 years of experience in technology.
Thank you. Lareina, an introduction from you, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lareina. Very happy to be here to discuss and debate with the panel and the audience on my favorite subject, open banking. Thank you, FinStep Asia, for the opportunity. I'm part of HSBC's Wealth and Personal Banking division in Hong Kong, leading a team of very smart people, as our team name suggests, working on cool things like open banking, faster payments, digital identity, digitally led proposition, digital partnerships, etc. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Lareina. Manish? You're on mute, Manish.
Yes.
You're on mute.
Is it better now?
Yes. Go ahead.
Technical glitches, as they may call it. Hi, my name is Manish Diwaan. I am the managing director for Apex, which is API Exchange. We are one of the perhaps one of the biggest cross-border collaboration platform between financial institutions and fintech. We are a not-for-profit entity based out of Singapore. We host a lot of fintechs and financial institutions on our platform and helping them collaborate and work with each other. So happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Manish, and thanks, everyone. So let me start with something which is kind of more recent and top of the mind for me. Yesterday at Virtual FinTech Fair, we actually released a report called FinTech Exits. And 2 deals in that were very interesting. One was Plaid acquisition by Visa, and then Finicity acquisition by MasterCard. And a lot of people debate in the industry that these are very closely linked to what's happening in the open banking space. So that is the topic for today. And I feel that open banking is a great leveler, and basically it will not just result in fundamental financial rewiring and the infrastructure build up for delivering new types of experiences in financial services, but it will also lead to new business models, and it will lead to new product innovation by not just fintechs but also banks and other FIs. So if you want to kind of hear my own views on the subject, you can sort of visit our podcast called Invisible FinTech. But this session, I'm going to pick up the brain of all these smart people who are there on the panel and ask them some questions that sort of I have thought. And one of the first things that comes to my mind is that because I think you guys are based out of different countries, different regions. why don't we start with like what are the key initiatives in open banking in your region, and how they have been performing. So maybe we can start in the same order. Basically, Sam, we can probably start with you.
Okay, so I could say something about in Thailand and Southeast Asia. I think basically in Thailand, the open banking has been just started. A few banks, including Krungsri, is right now opening the platform, opening the API. It depends on the strength of each bank. So most basically the most of the bank right now we do the API for maybe points redemptions, API for installment platform, API for full payment, which the most of the bank are offering to those partners right now. However, what we've seen in Thailand, which we have launched together among between the banks using the API connection to the blockchain, which is we are doing on the eKYC, using the API from each bank, and then could do the cross reference checks between among the bank through the blockchain platform to do the eKYC, which using the to do the what we call opening the saving banking accounts, which we already launched since the beginning of the year, and then it will be followed through the other products in the future. So Thailand has just been started on this one. Right now, just only the one that I mentioned to do the eKYC, that we starting to use the business model that we are charging the fee between among the bank who use this API right now. The others we are talking and discussing maybe with our partners. Suppose in mostly on the mobile banking in Thailand right now, we presume to be the super app. So we're not just only doing on the transactional banking, purely on the mobile banking. So, but right now we are partnership with some of the online e-commerce, with the retail supermarket, with the hypermarket, with the fashion store, and using the API from that partner to be connected with our API to for selling onto the app right now. So this is what happened in Thailand at the beginning.
Right. The fascinating thing is that the end customer may not even realize what's happening in terms of open banking, but there's so much of sort of, the e-plumbing which is happening right now, right? And maybe Saurabh, can you give a view of what's happening in your region, and how has the open banking initiatives performed so far?
Sure, Amit. So India happens to be obviously a regulator-led market. But if you look at the PSD2 equivalent in India, we're talking about the NBFC account aggregator framework, right? The initial guideline from RBI came out in 2016, and then by 2020 we have 9 NBFC AA aggregators already in the country. So I think it started off very well. Of course, these NBFC account aggregators need to have a larger footprint. They need to cover a lot more use cases. So in that sense, we're still scratching the surface. Having said that though, if you actually look at the non-regulator-led initiatives, you'll see that banks such as ICICI Bank, banks such as Yes Bank, RBL, Federal, HDFC, have all got a fantastic API platform and a developer portal already going, right? So they're running hackathons independently. And coming back to the regulator has also launched a sandbox. We've all heard about the RBI sandbox. Developers can connect to it. We've got NPCI now looking at an API accelerator platform. So there's a phenomenal amount of collaboration already that's happening. Whether you look at it as a regulator-led initiative with NBFC AAA, which will be a true transformation in terms of democratizing the access to data and to financial services. Yes, Amit.
Yeah, maybe you can sort of switch off the video, because we are losing you in between.
Sure, Amit. Is this better now?
Yeah, much better.
Right. So I was just saying that India being a regulator-led market, we've got a lot of regulator support in terms of the NBFC account aggregator framework, and there's a lot of work happening there. I'm still waiting for a couple of the NBFC AA license holders to acquire certain prominence, have broad-based use cases which everybody can connect to. And then I was talking also about how banks have taken initiatives to develop API platforms. We at TransUnion Civil, as an example, also are creating developer portals. We are going completely into an API architecture. So I think API architecture, opening up access to data is top of mind in the financial services space in India. However, there is a lot more to see, right? And we're not talking about 2 or 3 large platforms which have gained prominence. So I'm looking forward to that. I hope that gives a good sense of what's happening here in India.
Yeah. And just to summarize, because you were cutting out, there are 2 things that stand out from India. I think one is the account aggregator framework, which is not just open, open payments or open, only related to a couple of things which are happening in, say, for example, UK, but really it's going towards how to include the insurance and the pension funds, as well as
utilities, absolutely,
the other segments as well. And I think a lot of people actually talk about this, that even in the markets where there's no mandate like US and India, I think India with the UPI framework has been able to build a very large interoperable instance of payments, open banking, because any fintech company, any bank, any tech player can actually use can actually offer real-time payments using the UPI framework. So with that, let's move over to Lareina and hear about Hong Kong and what's happening in that region.
Sure. For open APIs, well, that's the framework in Hong Kong. It's one key pillar of the HKMA Smart Banking Initiative launched back in 2018. So far, the industry have launched phase 1 and 2, so that happened last year. And these APIs primarily are focused on product information, product originations. We anticipate more detailed requirements on phase 3 and 4 to be released by HKMA at some point this year. Then as the Banking Association, we will be working together to detail out the requirements, what's need doing in basically for implementation.
Okay. Manish, over to you, views from Singapore, and then you're doing a lot of work cross-border with the Apex platform. So what's happening in your region or your sphere of influence?
Okay, so we are actually somewhere in the middle of all this, right? Because we are not Singapore-based alone. We are just a company registered and not-for-profit registered in Singapore, but we are working very, very actively and closely with host of players across the region. Very recently, as recent as last Thursday, I think, we have announced our partnership with NPCI, right? For them to be able to use the set of facilities and services that Apex has to offer. Apex, for those who are not aware, is a cross-border collaboration platform. We sit in the middle with a public sandbox, and we provide a global fintech catalog and an API catalog for fintechs and financial institutions, right? So we have both banks and financial institutions publishing their APIs on the Apex platform. And then we have a host of, close to about 350 plus fintechs who are providing their APIs on the platform. And we are helping them collaborate and talk to each other and be able to co-create experiments and prototypes in a matter of weeks, which would normally be taking months, as we all are aware, right? So we are doing our bit, not just in the region, but across South Asia and beyond that, to bring these 2 entities closer as much as possible. Little bit of nudges here and there from regulators obviously help and support the cause that we are doing, because a lot of institutions that we still talk to are still, reluctant by the fact that, how will I be able to productionize what I experiment here? And I think that's one of the key challenges that we are also trying to overcome. A lot of institutions are forthcoming, and they are they're willing to go the extra mile by saying, okay, let me just first go ahead and see if my experiment has any validation or not. I will come back to whether I can use this or not at a later date, right? And we are trying to provide this platform which will which allows people to, as I like to call it, fail fast, fail cheap, and fail as many number of times as you want to, because I think what we have not been doing purely by design and the way we are structured as financial institutions, uh, is that we are not allowed to fail for anything, right? We take 8-10 months to do one experiment, and there is absolutely no scope left for you to fail after you have spent 8 months doing something and spending few $100,000 US. I would rather fail multiple times in 8 days or 7 days, right? So we are asking banks to do that in 7 days, 6 days, what they were doing in 8 days, and that's where we are right now.
Right. And this is a very important aspect because, we ourselves at Medici have been trying to do this for like 7 years now, the collaboration between banks and fintechs. So I understand how important it is. And I think a lot of people, resources, and time has been spent on it. But I still feel that the model, the framework has still not been kind of figured out that what is the best way out, because the integrations are taking too much time. But Manish, I'll come back to this aspect, which is very important for this discussion, a little orthogonal, but I think we should cover it. Let's just sort of continue on the previous question, right? I wanted to hear some of the folks actually mentioned about mandates and directives. So my question will be that basically we have seen like 3 frameworks for open banking, right? One is what Europe calls as PSD2, or the UK calls as open banking, which is a mandate. And then, the banks, for example, in UK, the 9 banks were supposed to open their APIs and start this work, which they have done to a larger extent. Then there are markets like US and India where there was no regulation. And pretty much the banks and some of the players started doing the work on their own. Data sharing has been happening for a very long time. And then there might be something else as well, right? For example, Lareina, I know in Hong Kong, you guys have a mandate. So I wanted to know, starting from Sam again, maybe in that same order, what is there a mandate, or is there another framework in Thailand as far as open banking is concerned, or is it just sort of, market driven right now?
Okay, so actually we were talking with the Central Bank of Thailand, I think 2 or 3 years back, on how will they proceed on this one. I think Bank of Thailand has done pretty good job for many projects, but the one thing that they haven't done it yet is that the mandate or the open banking that they were discussing, and they were I think they were discussing and talking clearly with the MAS from Singapore, because they are like partner central bank together. This central bank has I think Singapore bank has not did the mandate yet at this moment, but they persuade the bank to do the open banking. However, in Thailand, still in right now, even during the after COVID, the open banking hasn't been put in the central bank plan yet, even the mandate and persuade on this one. It is purely done by the private banks in Thailand, or the leading 3-4 banks who keen on technologies are doing on our own API right now at the moment. I think basically what we have seen in PSD2 in UK is pro and con for the banks. It could be mandate to do some open banking, but I think in terms of working in the bank, I think we were afraid of the PSD2. If we're losing some data, and data is owned by customer SMS in UK, and you've seen a lot of the bank has losing a lot of revenue or cake to the new incumbent like FinTechs. So I believe in Thailand, we might not go in that stage. Basically, in the central bank is still focusing on the current banks, the existing bank at the moment. They believe how I think that the data protection in how banks rely on the data protection right now. And in Thailand, the PDPA one will be affected. Actually, they have to be affected this May, but it has been postponed until next May. So most of the data privacy right now, central bank trust on to the existing bank, which I believe might be next year, the central bank will come back and to do the persuade for the banks to do much more on the open banking. But however, on the three bank now, we are pushing that the API that it's beneficial for our partners to do on this one.
Right. No, you actually touched on a very important subject of sort of data privacy, because I think open banking and data sharing and the data privacy laws actually go hand in hand. For example, in Europe, because they have GDPR and PSD2 kind of hand in hand, it's a very important subject. And I was talking to somebody in the US, and they said that US is kind of very different and very hard to kind of do something like PSD2 or open banking regulation, because they also don't have a data privacy law as such. So there's no GDPR equivalent in there. And for example, what we are seeing in India is that there is a data privacy law also being developed at the same time. So that's a very interesting aspect. Maybe Lareina, over to you. In Hong Kong, you guys have a mandate, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. I actually worked in the UK leading open banking for about 2 years before I moved to Hong Kong, and I had a look at the looked after Singapore and Australia as well as Hong Kong in my regional role before. So I think the difference here is one side, if you say like mandate, it is the government pushing you to do something and you have to do it. The other side, market driven, I've found it's more fluid. It's voluntary basis, and by definition, you have the incentive to participate, which creates a different market dynamic. One side is tends to be a standoff between banks and fintechs. Banks are asked to give up some data. That's the mentality, because you're forced or mandated by the regulators to do so. The other side, you voluntarily choose to participate. In some markets, it's a hybrid model. It is yes, you're not forced to participate, but if you don't participate, you can't get out. It kind of motivates people. With the consumers have FOMO, fear of missing out. I think industry players, banks, fintechs, or whoever has the same mentality as well. To me, it's not the mandate that defines whether the open banking regime is going to be successful or not. It really depends on what value are we creating for the end consumers, and what kind of ecosystem we're creating.
Right. Well, very well said. Over to you, Saurabh. So in India, there's no mandate. So let me ask you a next level question, right? So what is the incentive for the banks to open APIs? And, like Lareina said, right? It does not really depend on the mandate or no mandate, but it actually depends on what is good for the customer. So tell us a little bit about India and why banks should open APIs and why they are doing that. What's the incentive?
Sure, Amit. And I like how you draw parallels between India and the US. Like you rightly said, even in India, the privacy bill is just coming about, right? But I think more and more customers are aware about their data. They want to kind of have control over their data. Open banking in any of the markets that you analyze that revolution can happen because there is either pressure from customers or regulators or fintech innovators. I think India is not about pressure from regulators. India has been about pressure from customers who want to kind of for accessing financial services, have control of their data. There's so much of data locked into banks, right? And fintech innovators is, I think, the reason why banks started really moving into the domain of having their API stacks. There's a phenomenal amount of innovation that has happened in the e-commerce domain in India. And I think banks realize that unless they have a complete API platform to be able to connect everywhere, this won't happen. I think consent architecture with Sehmati, which is the NBFC AA framework, will kind of further accelerate it. But in India, the reason why I feel banks are going in that direction is largely because customers need access to their data that's been locked away into banks. And then there are enough and more fintech innovators. India is home to 1,300 plus fintechs, right, who are all about leveraging data and analytics and technology. So I think those are the key drivers for India, Amit.
Right. So Manish, I have a sort of a little bit of a tricky question for you based on what all of these guys have said, right? So they are saying that there are mandates in some places, there are no mandates, banks are still opening APIs. You have a very sort of, central role to this because you are seeing everything. Where do you think, either in terms of countries or in terms of the types of banks, because I feel that people say APIs, but there's a lot of difference between an API from a Stripe versus an API from a from a traditional bank, right? So I want to know, in terms of really usable APIs, what is the difference you see between different countries and different banks today?
Okay, that's a big one. Uh, eh, so let me try and answer this. So first of all, we need to have so many banks offering APIs. Incidentally, there are not so many banks offering APIs. There are very handful of banks who are offering APIs. And those are also largely, from what we understand, is very basic level, get account information, ATM information, get info sort of APIs, right? To get to the next level of creating, say, for example, if I'm a fintech who is dealing in, say, personal finance manager or robo advisory or some, that kind of certain level of maturity sort of thing, that still requires a lot of legwork that needs to happen between the fintech involved and the institution involved, right? And that's primarily because of multiple reasons. First of all, the complexity of the use case, and also around the data privacy and so on and so forth around that particular requirement, right? I would say banks are moving fast, but it's incidental that only a few banks are moving fast. Few are still delayed. Not just bank. Why am I saying banks? Few financial institutions are moving very fast. Few are still very late. I can give you, for an example, we have institutions on our platform who have completed in a matter of 7 months about 16, 17 experiments across different category of use cases across different departments within the organization. And there are few who are still arranging for meetings to discuss the first use case. Both of them claim to have dev portals and everything else. And that's the reality of things. It's all about the mindset that you have. If you say that, okay, I will do ATM locator APIs and call myself a dev portal and fancy blue color, green color portal, blah blah blah, I don't know. Anybody's guess, right?
Yeah.
And you could just go out and say, I don't have a dev portal, but I'll connect myself to an Apex or any other equivalent platform and ensure that I drive it from a management point of view that we are going to be there, we're going to do everything right, and we're going to work with as many fintechs as possible and create as many experiments and as many new products and services.
Right. No, thanks for being very sort of open about it, because we feel that there are many aspects to it, right? It's not just about saying that what type of API, but also what is the kind of tech documentation that you have, so that the developers can actually use them easily. Also, how rich are the APIs? What is the sort of the uptime, and there's so many parameters, right? Without going into the technicality of it. Let me actually switch over to another topic on the slightly commercial side. So, and maybe I can start actually with Lareina. So some of the questions now are actually very specific to basically your roles and backgrounds. So Lareina, one of the things is that many financial executives at banks and FIs realizing the potential of open banking, especially in countries where there are mandates and where there's a lot of work happening with open banking, they are actually looking at some sort of returns to come in from all the investment that they are making today. So what are your views in terms of with all these investments going in, what is the expectation of the returns from open banking initiatives and spend?
Investment as explicitly from, are you talking about open market investors into fintechs, or the bank itself in investment in?
The bank, whatever money is spending on opening up API, setting up the developer portals, and so many other things that you're doing as a part of that.
Yeah, well, I think actually the beauty of having the mandate starting back in 2016 in the UK with the CMA and then later European PSD2 is that there is no ambiguity. From the bank perspective, there's no debate. To Manish's point about do we do this, do we not do this, it is you have to do this. So that started HSBC off globally, I think, from the open banking perspective. The investment, while as I can't disclose the exact amount and percentage increases, I can say that globally that number is going up. And we do acknowledge open banking presents a massive opportunity. But different regions or different countries, because of the local regulation and how the framework is set up, we're approaching this very differently. So for example, in the UK, we did an aggregator play. We also did a proof of concept in marketplace banking in that we become the introducer. We are the marketplace and we offer products, not just from HSBC Group, but particularly to the customer need. And there will be, the product may be from a different banking group entirely. So these are the experiments we did in that market where there is a centralized, almost like a verifier to say all these participants in open banking, they are authorized by the FCA and they will take the liabilities if anything went wrong. You mentioned earlier about data privacy and that's much better governed, I think, under the GDPR framework and the liability model is clear. But that is the first market or first region to develop open banking or PSD2. So I think it's natural that they are probably more ahead in the framework that's in place. Coming into Hong Kong, what we are still struggling with is actually the liability model. So in the Hong Kong model, for people who are not 100% familiar with it, is banks need to verify the TSPs when TSPs request to use the bank's API. And because the liability still sits with the bank, even if the product is offered by the FinTech. So we will need to be very careful in terms of the vetting we do on this third party, because they are not necessarily licensed or authorized or governed by financial regulators like SPF or HKMA. So that changes the dynamic and what we have to do quite a bit. And that bit, I think the verdict is still out in terms of what phase 3 and 4 are waiting for, because that could entail very likely to include more sensitive information like account information, transactional data, like what we have seen in the UK phase 3. So I guess to summarize, we see that as an opportunity, but at the same time, the safeguarding, the duty of care to customers and to the make it bigger prudency of the financial market doesn't go away for us as a bank.
Right. And I'm just keeping a check on the time. So let me just sort of switch topics quickly here. Sam, a question for you in terms of standards and sort of are there any common governance frameworks and technical standards for open APIs that you have seen either in your region or globally?
I think the standard will be the same. In our bank, we work with IBM to do the APIs platform and offering to the customers. And I think most of the banks are using the same platform right now with the IBM. Some of them might use their own, but I think on the technical side, we don't have much problems on that. The thing that we are seeking is, like Manish said, we need to see the use cases. So right now, the use case will be pretty much on the payments rather than others. Right now, this that I mentioned to you, we have heavily on the API points, API full payment, API installment, which is basically not that the sexy one, but it in terms that the reason that we create this one because it's measurable and it could create a revenue to the banks. That's why we come up with this kind of API first, rather than the basic API like customer inquiry, ATM branch, that was the basic API, which it doesn't create the revenue for the bank. So right now, we are in stage of the how to commercialize on this API. And some of API we are still struggling with. We need to maybe learn from HSBC. How could you do the commercial to the partners? How would you charge to the fintech whenever they use it? The fintech come and ask us that they don't have much money to pay, but they want some of the API. How could you offer to them? But since we are would like to be the fintech bank, then we have to see that how much that we can charge to them. That is the one thing that we have to learn a lot from this.
Right. Manish, anything you have seen in terms of some common governance frameworks or a global sort of API standard for open banking, or is that something that you guys are working on?
Apex, I think, will end up creating this global standard perhaps at some point in time. We hope to do that sooner than later. One thing that struck me, while listening to the other panelists, I think it's important for us to do a little bit of a soul searching as institutions. When we say that there are only a few critical use cases that we want to work with, right? That should not be the case to begin with. I come from almost 20 years of banking prior to moving to Apex. Every department in a bank has some or the other problem to solve, right? Some take precedence over others because they could be revenue, or they could be, hard hitting, long term, etc., 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 or just plain fancy thing which caught somebody's eyes somewhere, right? If I look at any department in a bank, we'll have at least one or two use cases sitting right there today, not too far today. And if you were to calculate it, it would be at least 16 to 17 live important use cases from that department's perspective today. And if as an institution, if we are able to crack that part, irrespective of whether there is any guideline around it, if anybody mandated it, if my friend and family in another bank is doing it or not, it is about what I want to fix in my bank or my insurance company or my AMC or wherever you are, right? That's essentially the critical starting point. There are some very good examples of small little banks, institutions in the region, in ASEAN, in South Asia, who are doing remarkable job just because they identified these critical things first. And I think that's important for us to realize.
Yeah, that's a very important point. In fact, in my own experience, so we built this platform with access to 14,000 startups globally, and we gave it to the banks, and with due respect to all the bankers. But what we saw is that even then they did not want to kind of use it to sort of, go out and work with those startups. So we started offering like this 1 month of work that we'll do. We'll send a person, he will work with the different business units, figure out the use cases, help with to prioritize them with the CEO team. And that led to a quick sort of movement into some of the POCs and all that. So we realized that, solving a problem like this is not just a machine play, it is a man and machine play. So you have to kind of put both. But Saurabh, very quickly, one more question from my side, and there are a bunch of questions coming from the audience. This is specifically something I know that you kind of look at. What, in terms of the fintechs, right? How fintechs are benefiting from open banking and open APIs, and any examples that you can give, where fintechs have really been able to use what banks are offering as open APIs.
Well, I want to go back to where we started, Amit, and the biggest global scale case study itself is UPI, where there are big tech companies who've entered that space. They are payment service providers. NPCI has really transformed the landscape with standardized. Yeah, I'm going off video again. Is my audio any better now, Amit?
Yeah, slightly better. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. So I was just saying that I want to go back to where we started, Amit, which is UPI, which is a global case study. It's a prime example of how big tech companies were really able to play in payments at scale here. There are payment service providers who do not have a prepaid instrument license here in India, but they have a very strong play in payments. And from payments now, these big tech companies are going into cross-selling other financial services products, be it insurance, be it wealth products, investment products, all of that is happening. So that's your best, example of collaboration that has happened in India. However, when it comes to lending use cases with fintechs, there are enough and more fintechs which are collaborating with banks. Again, I think the challenge is related to your previous question, Amit, that there is no standardization of APIs across banks here in India, right? Every bank has its own set of APIs. And hence, I think there's a key role that players like NPCI and iSpirit will have to play. It's not a mandated requirement here in India, like you said, so RBI may not play that role. It's going to be NPCI and iSpirit playing that role here in India. But it's going to be, a fintech really married to a bank, right? We saw how there were several fintechs who were married to a Yes Bank. There were several fintechs who were married to an RBL, and then similarly with ICICI. There are very few multi-bank players here in India, and that's a key requirement, of the day. Standardization can only bring that about. So there are several examples. Look, I mean, all digital mobile lending apps in the country have banks powering the books in the background, right? So there are plenty of those examples, but I still love the UPI example, which is the best case study from India.
Yeah. Anybody else wants to give one quick example, and then we'll move over to the questions from the audience? Any use case or any example of a fintech?
Yeah, I guess the example was given was on the fintechs getting things from the bank and produce that into something different business model offering to the customers. I've got this example here that there's a fintech in the UK we work with called Bud, and they basically, since they worked with us on the proof of concept on the marketplace banking idea, actually, they pivoted their business model entirely from B2C to B2B, and they became an open banking service provider. So I think that that kind of fintech offering service into the bank or offering technology into the bank, offer data into the bank, that's another way. So it's two-way.
Yeah. So, but if I'm not wrong, they basically aggregate fintech APIs and provide to the bank so that new functionalities can be offered. It's the other way around, right?
I think that's one of their offerings now. Yeah, there are other offerings, including data enrichment, transaction data cleansing, etc., etc.
Okay, great. So let me take some questions from here. There are about 4 questions right now from the audience. The first question is, what role might the legacy card schemes play in offering open banking APIs, digital rails, cross-border transactions? Anyone wants to take this? Saurabh, maybe coming from TransUnion Civil, you might have an opinion on what would the card schemes do, the Visa, MasterCards?
Yeah, sure. While TransUnion Civil doesn't directly work with the networks, which is the Visas and the MasterCards, having said that, I think there is so much of intelligence when it comes to card spends, where you're spending, how much you're spending, which can be a key enabler when it comes to inclusion for credit use cases, lending use cases. And that's a key indicator today, because when you look at e-commerce point of sale lending, checkout financing, that's really growing in the country. For that primary use case, because remember, credit market growth in India has been largely consumption led. So if you take that thread forward and see that as a rising trend for the future, if Visa and MasterCard can have open APIs where trends around spends, what kind of merchants do they spend on, what are their lifestyle, what is the borrower's lifestyle going to look like, that can be a key feeder into how we underwrite credit, how we maybe give certain advantages for certain end use cases when it comes to borrowing, right? So I hope that's able to answer the question, but I think there's a huge play that Visa and MasterCard can have in offering spend category related insights.
No, just very quickly, also to add to that, Visa and MasterCard always have liked to be sort of in the middle and benefit from a very small part of the payment transactions. As we move towards card not present transactions, especially mobile payments, tokenized digital payments, there's a need for the card schemes to remain in that center, to be able to sort of continue with their business model. And that's where I think the open banking startups like Plaid and Finicity were doing really well by providing APIs from the banks to the new banking and fintech players. So that's why you see Visa and Mastercard acquiring these companies. They want to remain relevant, in this new sort of regime.
Very true. Because I think payments were starting to skip the rails of these network providers. And that's why this acquisition makes sense to still kind of have a play in the whole API plumbing, be part of the flow of data. But I think we're looking for certain similar innovations by Visa and MasterCard in India as
well. Yeah. I was going to take one more question, but I think Manish has already replied to that. There was a specific question on APIs on Apex. So please reach out to Manish. He has put his email ID, manish@afin.tech. We have another question. How can we shift open banking from a compliance exercise by the banks to an empowered consumer client experience? And I think that's something that Lareina was actually talking about earlier. So any more thoughts, Lareina, on this?
The key word here, and an English word I never can pronounce properly, so excuse me there, reciprocity. There we go. So in a nutshell, if we are to create a harmonious ecosystem, let's say, for the APIs to thrive, everybody needs to get something out of it. Consumers, no doubt, and we're focusing on the consumers. FinTechs upping the game, developing new business models, et cetera, et cetera. From the bank perspective, if the bank is only a pure data giver, there's less incentive for the banks to participate, and you can't really blame them for treating it as a compliance exercise. Once we can show, to Sam's point earlier, how we can commercialize open banking, develop new revenue streams for the bank, new business models, etc., I think it will be a natural shift.
Right. This is also partly an answer to Simran's question, but Simran, probably you can reach out to us offline. We are running out of time, but I think this answers some part of it. This is a very interesting question. Maybe Sam, you can take a crack at this one. It says, how can open banking help decrease the digital divide and bring more informal economy into the formal economy? So basically, for financial inclusion, I guess that's the question.
Yeah, I think it basically the open banking is how is the bank or how is the customer can reach the bank easier, more convenient. Probably when we present the open banking to the board of directors, it means that how can we reach customer easily and how can be the convenient places for them. Wherever they go, they could see us, they could see our banks at that designated point, or even that how can the customer can reach us easily. There will be decrease the digital one. So that would be the concept of the open banking that what we are using right now.
Right. And I can give one example that I was talking to this fintech company that basically caters to the bottom of the pyramid customers. And what they did was working with an insurance company, using their APIs, they were able to offer insurance where you can pay on a weekly, monthly basis. So they, it becomes kind of very easy for, somebody to pay. And I think there are many use cases like that which are developing so that affordability can be made better. So there's a question, what else will an API marketplace provide as benefits besides aggregation, listing, and documentation of APIs? Anyone wants to take this?
It essentially levels the playing field, right? Today, if you expect a fintech to go door-to-door knocking in a country like India because he or she is dealing in payments, they'll probably be spending 2 lifetimes doing that, right? A platform which allows free conversations between a community of fintechs and a community of financial institutions is what is the need, right? And that is what it tries to solve. What transpires out of these conversations is a separate story altogether. Some may result in some business, some may result in some other introduction, who may result in some other business. It's never going to be a futile exercise. Please take it as your resume on any XYZ job platform, for example, right? It is that, right? It's never a futile exercise. It's always going to result in something, maybe from brand exposure, maybe from API exposure, maybe in actual business, maybe in creating something with some other fintech, because we have seen on Apex, where fintechs have come together to create a master product, right? So it's all possibilities there.
Wonderful. I think we have kind of almost run out of time, but it's been a wonderful discussion. The dynamics of open banking, are so, I would say, like the developments are happening as we speak, right? So the discussion never ends here. I think we'll continue over many more debates and articles and posts. But thank you so much, Lareina, Manish, Sam, and Saurabh for providing your insights. And thanks to Virtual FinTech Fair for sort of hosting us on this great talk.